My mom made me look like an idiot and set me up. Because of her, I was put in a mental hospital, and then I sued her. My name's Marcus Daly. I'm 32, and not too long ago, I thought I had finally turned the corner in life. After what felt like years of nothing but doors slamming in my face, bad jobs, no jobs, rejections, overdrafts, you name it, I somehow pulled off what felt like a miracle. I won a federal grant. A real one. Not some $1,000 gimmick, but a full-blown six-figure agriculture revitalization grant. They were investing in sustainable projects on underused land, and my proposal hit the right note. I nearly fell off my chair when the approval email came in. The first thing I did, after bawling in my kitchen for a solid 15 minutes, was drive 2 hours back to the outskirts of the town I grew up in. Specifically, to the edge of the old gravel road where my grandfather's farm used to stand. It had been sitting there, rotting for decades. Weeds had claimed most of it, the barn roof had caved in, and the house itself had all but given up. But I saw it differently. To me, it looked like a resurrection waiting to happen. I moved back a month later. Traded my city apartment for a trailer on the edge of the property, just temporary while I figured things out. I started by clearing the land. I rented a skid steer, hacked back brush, pulled out rusted fencing. I hired 3 guys from town. One of them was Travis, a guy I barely knew in high school who now worked construction jobs when he could find them, and 2 younger kids, Leo and Jace, who didn't know a damn thing about farming but were willing to learn and weren't afraid to sweat. I paid them better than minimum wage. Not by much, but enough that they didn't quit on me after the first brutal week. I bought equipment. Not new, because there was no way the grant money stretched that far, but solid stuff. An old Kubota tractor, a used BCS walk-behind tiller, a greenhouse frame off Craigslist that I rebuilt piece by piece. Every dollar I spent felt like it was building a future I could finally believe in. I wasn't just planting crops. I was planting the kind of life I'd always wanted. Independent. Rooted. Mine. There was this one afternoon. I think it was late April, still chilly in the mornings but warm by noon, when I stood at the edge of the first tilled field and just stared. We had just finished the first round of planting. Spinach, kale, arugula, a few beds of early potatoes. It looked clean, organized, hopeful. The sun hit the rows at just the right angle, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like a goddamn winner. I remember calling my mom that night and telling her about the seedlings. She cried on the phone, said my grandpa would have been proud. And maybe, in that moment, I believed it too. It felt like everything I had gone through, the couch surfing, the fast food jobs, the 3 months I spent living in my car in Reno, had somehow led to this. To this farm. To this project. I was finally in control. Finally building something that no one could take from me. Or so I thought. The opening day of the farm was meant to be a celebration. I'd rented folding chairs from the VFW hall, laid out lemonade and cookies on a folding table near the greenhouse, and even convinced Leo to rig a Bluetooth speaker out of a busted radio so we could play some music. It wasn't anything fancy, but it felt good. The first spinach beds were already sprouting green. The tillers had just broken new ground for the summer crops, and the guys were walking around with a rare kind of pride. We had built this. Me, with my own hands, my own sweat. I wasn't expecting her to show up. Clara, my mother. I hadn't seen her in almost 3 years. Not since the day she told me she was sorry, but everything my grandfather left behind. Land, tools, the old pickup, even the antique clock from the living room mantel, was going to Logan. It's simpler this way, she had said, as if that explained why my half-brother, who hadn't shown up for Grandpa's funeral and hadn't set foot on the farm in over a decade, walked away with everything. So when I saw her stepping out of a dark blue Ford with tinted windows, wearing her usual beige slacks and fake pearls, my stomach tightened. I thought maybe she was just coming to look, to see what I'd done without her. Maybe even to apologize, though that felt like a stretch. But then the other door opened, and a man in a charcoal suit stepped out behind her, holding a leather folder under his arm and wearing that tight, official smile that people only seem to put on when they're about to ruin something. She walked straight over to me like we hadn't been strangers for years and gave me this light kiss on the cheek, like we were still some normal mother and son duo. Marcus, this is beautiful, she said, waving a hand at the fields. Really, it's incredible what you've done. I nodded, unsure what to say. The truth was I didn't want her there. But I didn't want a scene either. People were around. The mayor's assistant was there. The newspaper guy had his camera out. Then she said it. I was thinking, with how fast you're growing and all the opportunity coming your way, maybe it's time we formalize things. You know, make it a family business. It'll open up doors. Financing. Grants. Tax breaks. The notary behind her nodded like this was all very routine. I looked at her, and for a second, I didn't even answer. My mind was still stuck on the word family. You're talking about paperwork, I finally said. Ownership. It's just to make it official, she said, already flipping open the folder. You'd still run everything, of course. We just list it under a family LLC. It's easier to grow that way. People trust the word family more than they trust one guy with a grant and a few acres of kale. I looked down at the papers, and sure enough, there it was. Clara Daly and Marcus Daly, joint owners. A placeholder for a third signature too, but that line was left blank. I asked about it. Oh, she said casually. We can leave that for later. Just in case Logan wants to invest down the line. You know how he is with business opportunities. Always looking for the next thing. She said it like Logan's name didn't immediately make my jaw clench. Like he hadn't disappeared with the inheritance and used it to buy into some pyramid scheme in Phoenix that tanked within 6 months. Like he hadn't sent me one smug text from a golf course and never followed up. But I signed it. I don't even know why. Maybe it was the pressure of the moment, the presence of guests, the notary staring at me with his clipboard ready. Maybe it was a small, stupid part of me that still wanted her approval. I told myself it was just paperwork, just a name on a form, that nothing would really change. As I handed the pen back and she thanked me, I felt something shift. A knot in my gut I couldn't quite explain. But the moment passed. She stayed for 20 minutes, shook hands with the mayor's assistant, posed for a photo in front of the greenhouse, and left as quickly as she came. The notary disappeared with her. That night, sitting on the trailer steps with a beer in my hand and my boots covered in soil, I tried to tell myself it was fine, that nothing was different, that it was still my farm, my work, my vision. But something about the way she said, "we" stuck with me. I didn't know it then, but I'd just made a fatal mistake. It was about a month after that signing day when I noticed something wasn't right. At first it was little things. Emails from the agriculture department that used to come directly to me were suddenly going to a shared inbox I didn't remember setting up. A bank notification about a transaction I didn't make. And then the invoice from the seed supplier was addressed not to me personally, but to Daily Farms LLC, a name I hadn't used. I thought maybe it was just the result of registering the farm as a formal business. I told myself not to overthink it. I'd never run a business before. Maybe this was just how things worked once you had an actual name on paper. But then I tried to apply for a small equipment subsidy, just a few thousand to help upgrade our irrigation. I logged into the USDA portal, punched in my grant reference number, and the system flagged my application. Applicant name mismatch. I tried again. Same result. I called the helpline, waited on hold for nearly 40 minutes, then finally got someone who sounded like they were eating lunch while talking to me. After some back and forth, the woman on the other end finally said, "I see here the grant is issued to Daily Agribusiness Holdings. The primary contact is listed as Logan Daly. Is that you?" I felt like the air had been punched out of me. "No," I said slowly, already feeling my throat tighten. "I'm Marcus. Marcus Daly. I'm the one who applied. I'm the one who submitted the proposal. I've been running this project." There was a pause, and then she said, "You're listed as a secondary point of contact, but all financial and legal decisions go through the principal, Logan Daly. If you want access, you'll need to go through him." I don't remember hanging up. I don't remember getting up from my desk in the trailer. All I remember is the absolute silence in that moment, broken only by the buzz of the old refrigerator and the wind against the aluminum siding. I sat there for a long time, staring at the wall, trying to piece it together. Later that evening, I pulled out the paperwork from the folder she'd brought. The copy I had. I'd filed it away in one of the old cabinets I was using as an office. I read through it line by line, and I noticed things I hadn't seen before, things I hadn't thought to look for. The LLC had 3 members, not 2. I'd signed page 4, but the control clauses were buried on page 9, in the middle of a block of legalese I never fully read. There it was, in black and white. Full operational authority rests with the managing director, Logan Daly. Me? I was listed as a founding participant, with advisory rights. Advisory, not executive, not even partial. I ran my fingers over the signature line, remembering the way she had distracted me that day. All smiles and talk of tax benefits. I had signed without reading the fine print. I had trusted her, even after everything. Then came the real kicker. I drove into town the next day and visited the local county office to pull the records myself. I needed to know exactly what had been filed. The clerk, a soft-spoken woman with coffee-stained teeth and a worn-out cardigan, took a while to find the registration. When she handed it over, the name on the document hit me like a hammer. Daily Agribusiness Holdings LLC, managing member, Logan R. Daly. Not just that. The land deed had been reassigned too. The property itself, which I thought was still in my name under temporary usage, was now listed as an asset owned by the LLC. My name was on none of it. Nothing tied to me. Nothing binding. The grant money, the equipment, even the tractor, I didn't own a damn thing. I walked out of that building in a daze, past the rusted bike rack and the faded American flag fluttering on the pole, barely able to think. It was as if the ground had been pulled out from under me. Everything I'd built, every seed planted, every hour worked, it was all under someone else's name now. And not just someone. Logan, my half-brother. The guy who once tried to sell our grandfather's coin collection to pay off credit card debt and laughed when I tried to stop him. And Clara, my own mother. She had walked onto that farm, hugged me like a son, and handed me documents that signed my life away. I had made a fatal mistake. And now I wasn't even sure if I legally worked on my own farm. A week after I found out everything had been transferred to Logan's company, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. I was standing by the greenhouse, watering the starter trays with one hand while holding the phone in the other, still half hoping this was all some kind of clerical error that could be fixed with a few emails and maybe a meeting with a lawyer. The voice on the line was calm, slick, and unmistakably corporate. "Marcus Daly?" he asked, though he clearly knew it was me. "I'm calling on behalf of Daly Agribusiness Holdings. Mr. Logan Daly asked me to reach out." There was a pause. I didn't say anything, just stared at the wet soil pooling around the arugula. "We've been reviewing your role on the property and the use of company assets," he continued. "Obviously, you're still on site, and Mr. Daly would like to offer you continued involvement. Provided," he added, and I remember this word exactly, "that you behave yourself." I asked him to clarify. He chuckled, as if I'd just misunderstood something simple. "We want to avoid confusion moving forward. You're welcome to keep working the land, of course, but as an employee, there's a possible operations role if you're interested, something hands-on. You clearly know the property." I said nothing. He then shifted tone. "Also a reminder, there are still some outstanding personal liabilities linked to your father. Our legal team reviewed the documents. Some of the equipment you financed was partially leveraged against old debts from the estate. As Logan has assumed ownership, he's within his rights to settle those balances using operational assets unless an alternative arrangement is made." I remember gripping the edge of the greenhouse bench so tightly that one of the wooden slats cracked under my palm. "My father's debts were settled when he died," I said. "That estate was cleared." "Not entirely," the man replied smoothly. "Some of the debts were never formally discharged. Loans, old liens, family obligations. You understand how these things can get buried in paperwork. In any case, they're now associated with the Daly name, and technically, since the entity is Logan Daly's, you're in a bit of a gray area. But again, if you cooperate, none of this needs to be a problem." That was the moment it hit me just how deep this setup went. The tractor I had spent weeks fixing, the irrigation system I installed, even the damn greenhouse frame I had welded together in the freezing cold, none of it belonged to me anymore. On paper, I was just some guy working the land. The guy who built it was gone, legally erased. All of it had been folded into Logan's company, and I was being offered the privilege to keep doing what I was already doing, as long as I stayed in line. The final punch came in a printed letter delivered 2 days later. It came in a crisp envelope with a Daily Agribusiness Holdings return address, and inside was a formal notice reminding me that unauthorized use of company property, meaning the equipment I bought, could be grounds for legal action. The last line read, "To remain on site, Mr. Daly must adhere to company expectations and defer to managerial oversight as determined by Mr. Logan Daly." I didn't need a lawyer to explain what was happening. They'd taken everything I had built, signed it out from under me, and now they were dangling the right to keep working in front of me like a dog begging for scraps. And if I didn't go along with it, they'd bury me under paperwork and throw my own father's debts at my feet like chains. They weren't just taking the farm. They were rewriting the whole story. And in this new version, I was lucky just to be allowed in the picture. The first time I realized what Logan was actually doing with the farm, it was late summer, and the fields were already starting to dry out. I'd stopped planting weeks earlier, not by choice, but because the seed orders I submitted kept getting ignored, and the equipment I needed was suddenly in for maintenance or reserved for another site. I remember standing at the edge of the west plot, looking out over what used to be rows of kale and spinach, now just dirt and a few scattered weeds. It didn't make sense. We had the equipment. We had the labor. We had everything. But I was told to slow operations and scale down unnecessary planting. Those were the words they used. It wasn't until I overheard a phone call between Logan and one of his so-called consultants that the pieces started falling into place. I'd walked into the office trailer to grab a set of invoices and heard him say, clear as day, "We'll just move the numbers around for Q3, file the subsidy claims under projected loss due to weather. That way it still counts." I froze in the doorway. He didn't even flinch, just looked up at me and gave me that smug little nod like nothing was wrong, like I was supposed to be in on it. Later that week, I got a folder shoved into my hands from one of his admin people. Inside were the quarterly reports for the USDA and the state's AG office. Except the crop yields were total fiction. Dozens of rows supposedly planted. Hundreds of pounds of produce harvested. It even included a breakdown of sales to local markets I'd never delivered a single box to. My name was on the preparer's line. I took it straight to Logan. I slammed the folder down in front of him in the barn office and said, "What is this?" None of this happened. He didn't even look at the pages. Just leaned back in the chair like he had been waiting for this exact moment. "You're overreacting," he said calmly. "It's just numbers to keep things moving. We'll make it up later." "No," I said, my voice louder than I intended. "This is fraud. This is grant money. You're using the farm to launder subsidies for crops we never even planted." That's when his tone changed. He leaned forward, rested his elbows on the desk, and gave me this cold, deliberate stare. "You really think you're going to lecture me after everything I've covered for you? After the debt? After the documents you signed without reading?" He let that hang for a moment before continuing. "You're already tied to the grant. You filed the application. You filed the first set of reports. If this goes south, do you really think they're going to come for me?" I just stood there, jaw clenched, trying not to let the weight of what he was saying crush me. He wasn't just threatening me. He was telling the truth. Legally, the paperwork still had my signature. My name was on the original grant application. If anyone looked closely, if the government came knocking, I'd be the one holding the bag. "I don't want to be part of this," I said quietly. He stood up, walked around the desk, and clapped a hand on my shoulder like we were brothers again. "Then don't make waves. Just sign the reports. Keep your head down. Keep your place." That night, I sat in the trailer with the report in front of me, pen in hand, staring at the blank signature line. I had two choices: refuse to sign and risk being buried in legal hell, possibly even charged with fraud myself, or go along with it and pretend I was still a farmer, still building something honest. My hands were shaking when I finally pressed pen to paper. I told myself it was just to buy time, to figure out what to do next. But I knew what it really meant. I wasn't a farmer anymore. I was a front, a name on a line, a pawn in Logan's scam. And I couldn't even prove it without taking myself down with him. I thought I could still do the right thing. I convinced myself that if I got the truth out to the right people, someone would step in, someone would see what was happening and stop it before it got worse. So I reached out to a local reporter I vaguely remembered from high school, Becky Thompson, who'd been working at a small, independent paper 2 counties over. I sent her everything I had. Copies of the falsified subsidy reports, a timeline of the equipment purchases, documentation of the land transfer, and the grant application with my name on it. We met once, at a diner off Highway 17, and she listened carefully, took notes, asked questions. She seemed cautious but interested. The story never ran. Instead, 3 days later, photos started circulating online, blurry shots from over a decade ago, taken at some college house party I barely remembered. One of them showed me holding a blunt and laughing, my eyes red, slouched into a couch next to a girl whose name I couldn't even recall. Another had me at a table full of beer cans, shirt off, with writing all over my chest in Sharpie. Typical college crap. But now it was being framed as something else. The captions were brutal. Grant fraud farmer has history of drug abuse. Public funds to support criminal past. The images had clearly been pulled from someone's old social media, maybe even hacked. I hadn't seen them in years. I don't know who sent them out, but I could guess. Within a week, my bank accounts were frozen. Not officially closed, but flagged. I found out the hard way when I went to buy parts at the hardware store and my debit card was declined. I called the bank thinking it was a technical error, but the woman on the phone, clearly reading off a script, informed me that due to ongoing investigations and compliance concerns, your access has been temporarily restricted pending review. I asked what investigation. She wouldn't say. That same day, I got an official-looking envelope in the mail. It wasn't from the bank or Logan or the USDA. It was from the Office of the Inspector General. Inside was a notice stating I was being summoned for questioning in connection to possible misreporting of federal agricultural grant funds. The letter didn't accuse me of anything outright, but the tone was clear. They weren't just curious. They were building something. The worst part was the wording. We have received an anonymous tip regarding financial discrepancies tied to Daily Agribusiness Holdings LLC. Anonymous. As if I didn't know exactly who would do something like that. Logan hadn't just set me up to fall. He was greasing the wheels to make sure I hit every rock on the way down. I tried calling Becky, the reporter, to ask what the hell happened. Her number had been disconnected. I tried emailing her. Nothing. I checked the paper's website. No mention of the farm, no mention of me. It was like I had never existed. By the end of the week, I couldn't even log into the USDA portal. My credentials had been revoked. I had no access to my own reports, no ability to amend or contest the filings that carried my signature. I was out of the system, Out of the story, out of options. Even the guys I used to work with, Travis, Leo, Jace, stopped answering my calls. Whether they were told not to talk or just didn't want to get dragged down with me, I couldn't say. But the silence spoke loud enough. I had tried to break free. I had tried to drag the truth into the light. And all it got me was a deeper hole, one that now came with a paper trail, a ruined reputation, and a ticking clock before I was sitting across from a federal agent being asked questions I already knew the answers to. I was already exhausted by the time the interrogation began. I hadn't slept more than a few hours in days, hadn't eaten anything solid since the letter arrived, and my nerves were hanging on by threads. The building was colder than I expected, sterile in that way only federal offices can be, gray walls, plastic chairs, the kind of place where the clock ticks louder than it should. 2 agents were assigned to me, one who asked the questions, and the other who mostly just stared, occasionally flipping through a file that had my name on it in bold black letters. They started off with standard stuff. Timelines. Financial questions. My relationship to the company. I told the truth, at least as much as I could without dragging myself deeper. I said I had signed the paperwork under the impression it was a basic LLC formation, that I was misled. They asked who presented the documents. I said my mother. I even admitted I hadn't read them closely, which they didn't seem surprised by. Then they opened the file. A new document. The one with her name on it. That's when everything started to tilt sideways. It was her testimony. Clara Daly. My mother. They read it to me aloud. She states that you coerced her into signing the registration forms. That you threatened to reveal personal information about her past if she didn't comply. That you were emotionally unstable. That she feared for her safety. I didn't understand at first. I asked them to repeat it. They did. Word for word. She said I had blackmailed her. She said I had a history of paranoia, that I'd had emotional episodes during my teenage years that required counseling, which was news to me, and that she only went along with the farm registration out of fear. Not family loyalty. Not trust. Fear. She described me as obsessive, unpredictable, and then the phrase that hit me like a sucker punch to the chest, a threat to the family's safety. I could barely breathe hearing it out loud. I told them it was a lie. I said I never laid a hand on her, never blackmailed anyone, never threatened anyone. I said I had built the farm from nothing and signed the documents in good faith because she came to me. She offered the deal. They nodded, wrote things down, didn't react. Then the one who had been quiet finally spoke. He said there had been concerns raised not just about the financial side, but about my mental state. That there was enough conflicting testimony to warrant a temporary hold, pending psychiatric evaluation. I thought it was a joke. I laughed, until he slid another form across the table. It was a court order. The next thing I knew, I was in the back of a transport van, wrists loose in plastic cuffs, escorted by 2 officers who didn't say a word the entire ride. The windows were dark. I couldn't see where we were going. When we pulled up, the sign on the gate said Regional Behavioral Assessment Center. The intake nurse asked me if I had any known diagnoses. I said no. She asked me if I was hearing voices. I said only the ones that keep lying about me. They kept me under observation for 72 hours. No phone. No contact. No explanation beyond what was in the report. I was monitored, questioned, watched as I tried to sleep on a plastic mattress in a locked room that smelled like bleach and stale air. The only visitor I had was a doctor who asked if I believed people were out to get me. I didn't answer. I just stared at the floor. Because the truth was too absurd to explain. The real threat had come from the one person I never thought would turn on me. The one who had kissed me on the cheek on opening day and smiled for photos while quietly signing away my life. It wasn't Logan or the lawyers or the agents that broke me. It was my mother. I was 3 days into the psych hold when I heard the knock on the observation glass. It was late, maybe just past midnight, and the lights in the hallway were dim to that sickly yellow hospitals always seem to use at night. I looked up expecting another nurse making rounds, but the face looking back at me was one I hadn't seen since high school, Cameron Fells. Back then he'd been lanky and always smelled like weed and cologne, but now he looked older, thicker around the shoulders, with just enough gray at his temples to pass for someone respectable in scrubs. He tapped the glass again and gave me this slight nod. Not friendly, not warm, just a signal. At first I didn't move. I thought maybe I was imagining it, that the stress had finally cracked me. But a minute later, my door buzzed open. Cam stepped inside, clipboard in hand, looking over his shoulder. I don't have time to explain, he whispered. Just listen. You didn't deserve this. I read the report. It's bull. You have 10 minutes. Follow me and keep your mouth shut. I didn't ask how he got involved or why he cared. Maybe he remembered something about me that wasn't in the files. Maybe he just hated seeing someone railroaded by people with power. Whatever the reason, I followed him. He led me through a back corridor, past a door marked maintenance. then into a stairwell. On the second floor, we slipped into a break room where he handed me a set of janitor scrubs and a lanyard with a smudged ID badge. You've got one shot. Take the service exit. The code's still 2379. After that, you're on your own. I asked him why he was helping. He didn't answer, just muttered, "Oh, you won," and walked away. I got out into the night without triggering any alarms. No one stopped me. No one even looked twice. The next part one hadn't planned, but it came to me fast. I remembered from years ago that my mother kept everything on her tablet, her emails, her legal docs, all of it. She never trusted cloud storage and always said she wanted her files where I can see them. I also knew she visited the clinic every Thursday afternoon. That's when I made my move. I waited outside the staff lot behind the clinic, face covered with a cheap hoodie and a hat pulled low. Her car pulled up right on schedule. I crept around, popped the back door, and slid inside while she was talking to a nurse at reception. The tablet was in her tote bag, sitting on the passenger seat. I took it and slipped out just as she came back outside. She never even saw me. It took me a day to break into it, using an old password she once used for our Netflix account, of all things. Inside the tablet was everything. PDFs of the original farm registration forms, showing that the first draft listed me as the managing partner, then a later version overwritten and signed again, only this time with forged signatures and notarizations filed under a different date. There were also GPS logs from her meetings with logistics brokers across the state, embedded in her calendar and synced with her car's GPS history. And what stood out most, there were no delivery destinations. The routes ended at warehouse parking lots. Empty lots. Not one record of produce actually leaving the farm to any buyer or distributor. Just meetings. Just signatures. Just subsidy paperwork. I packaged the data, encrypted it with a simple lock code, and compressed the folder. Then I created a new identity using a fake name I'd once used to sign up for a gym trial. Daniel Herrick. I bought a burner laptop and drove 2 towns over to connect to a coffee shop Wi-Fi that didn't require sign-in. From there, I submitted the package anonymously to the USDA Agricultural Fraud Unit through their internal reporting form. I included timestamps, location trails, legal documents, and the most damning part, scans of the subsidy claims against GPS logs showing that nothing ever moved from that farm. I signed the report as a concerned farm employee, provided a fake email for contact, and closed the laptop without looking back. My hands were shaking the entire time. I didn't know if it would be enough, but it was the first time in months that I felt like I was holding a weapon, not just waiting for the next blow. I'd been discredited, disowned, humiliated, locked up, but now, finally, I had evidence. Cold, unfiltered truth. And I'd put it exactly where it needed to go. The collapse didn't happen all at once. It started as a ripple, just a quiet news brief on a local station about a multi-state subsidy audit. But within days it turned into a full-on storm. I was sitting in a motel room 2 counties away, watching it unfold on a flickering TV with a busted remote and a thin layer of dust on everything. The names started rolling out one by one, and when I heard Logan's, I didn't feel relief. I felt numb. Turns out the farm wasn't just a money laundering site for Logan's petty subsidy grift. It was a front, a shell built to give legitimacy to a much larger operation. What I'd thought was about fake reports and unplanted fields was actually just the surface of something so much darker. The investigators dug up a paper trail that stretched across 3 states, linking Logan to a network of shell farms and fake cooperatives in both Texas and Illinois. Together, they'd siphoned off tens of millions in fraudulent claims over the last 4 years, all under the guise of disaster recovery programs and environmental resilience funds. The twist was how deep it went. Logan wasn't working alone. Federal agents raided state offices in Austin and Springfield. 2 agricultural program officers were arrested within a week. Names I'd seen at the bottom of approval letters and USDA correspondence turned up on arrest warrants. Logistics companies that never delivered a single crate of produce were suddenly padlocked. Warehouses that looked empty from the outside were found to be full of fake pallets, stacked for inspections that never happened. The media started calling it the dirt subsidy scandal. Headlines exploded across national outlets. It was the kind of story that made evening news anchors shake their heads and say things like, deeply disturbing. The kind that got politicians into hearings and made bureaucrats disappear overnight. And Clara, my mother, the one who had testified against me, the one who stood by Logan's side while everything was being built on lies, she folded almost immediately. Faced with the possibility of federal prison, she gave new testimony, claimed she didn't know the full extent, claimed Logan manipulated her, that she was afraid, that she only signed what he gave her out of trust. She said she thought the money was real, that the deliveries were real. She wept on video, asked for leniency, Said she feared for her safety. But the feds had her emails, her calendar entries, her voice memos. There was one recording where she told someone on a call, "Marcus won't be a problem. He doesn't have the stomach for this." Another where she laughed about how government money's just sitting there, waiting for people who know how to grab it. They didn't buy the new act. The last I saw of her was on a news clip, gray suit, hands cuffed in front, walking down courthouse steps between two federal agents. Her face looked different. Not afraid, not even ashamed. Just tired. Like maybe she knew it was all coming anyway, and she just ran out of places to hide. Logan was arrested in a private hangar outside of San Antonio. They found burner phones, fake passports, and a laptop with files tying him to overseas shell accounts. His mugshot made every major news site in under an hour. I watched it all unfold from that cheap motel, the same way someone watches a controlled demolition from a rooftop, removed, distant, still covered in dust, but no longer buried in the rubble. The empire they built, the lies they spun, the lives they stepped on to build it, it all crumbled. And this time, I didn't have to lift a finger. The truth was doing just fine on its own. They called it a deal, but it didn't feel like one at first. After everything, the investigation, the media storm, the raids and arrests, I still found myself sitting in a courtroom, not in the audience, not as a spectator, but listed as a defendant. Not for fraud, not for theft, but because my name had been on every key document. Because for years I'd unknowingly signed off on reports that made me look like a co-conspirator. The prosecution said they understood my position. The agents vouched for me. The files I had sent anonymously had become the cornerstone of their entire case. Still, legally, I was involved. They couldn't ignore that. So they came up with a middle ground. I would never receive compensation. Not for the land. Not for the equipment. Not even for the sleepless nights or the weeks spent locked in that clinic. No back pay. No restitution. Just a clause that would keep me out of prison and a chance to disappear. The terms were simple. I'd become a key witness in the case against Logan and the officials he worked with. I'd testify. I'd provide my full statement and all the original materials. And in exchange, I would be given a new identity and a one-time payment. $1. Exactly $1. Not symbolic. Not poetic. Just formal. That dollar, handed to me in court, was the legal transaction that transferred the farm and all its assets to the federal government. The judge had called it an equitable compromise. I called it the end. A year later, I was living in a small coastal town in Nova Scotia, the kind of place where people still wave to strangers and the bar closes when the bartender feels like going home. I didn't try to hide who I was up here. I didn't need to. The papers had moved on. Logan's trial had ended. The agencies had cleaned house. And Clara, well, she faded out of the headlines quickly once sentencing came down. I opened a pub. Nothing fancy. Just 8 taps, a chalkboard menu, and a worn-out jukebox in the corner. I called it the Dollar Farm. Locals didn't ask much about the name. A few thought it was some kind of joke. Others just liked how it sounded. I kept the sign simple. White paint on black wood. I poured drinks, wiped down tables, and didn't talk about where I came from unless someone asked real nice. Last week, just after closing, I was cleaning glasses behind the bar when the mail came through the front slot. Bills, ads, the usual stack of things I didn't want to deal with. But one envelope stood out. Thin, plain, no return address except a faint stamp in the corner from Washington, D.C. I opened it slowly, more out of habit than nerves. Inside was a single sheet of paper. "Thank you for your cooperation, Mr. Daly. Consider this matter officially closed." That was it. No signature. No follow-up. Just a sentence that carried more weight than it looked like it should. I read it twice, then folded it carefully and placed it under the bar, next to the old key from the farm that I still kept. Not because it unlocked anything anymore, but because it reminded me of what I'd built and what they took. So that's the end of it. No grand redemption arc. No $1 million payout. Just a pub in Canada, a fake name, and a letter from the government telling me I was finally free. Thanks for sticking with me through this. I've told you my side. Now I want to hear yours. What would you have done in my shoes? Would you have signed the papers? Would you have stayed quiet? Would you have tried to fight harder? Let me know what you think. I'm curious how it looks from the outside.